So, Professor Niels Harrit, you examined the rubble that came from the World Trade Center. What did you find in it?
Well, in there we find remains of what we characterize as a thermitic material. And this is a very energetic material which can be used either for melting iron or it can be designed as an explosive.
So what effect would the nanothermite have had on the collapse of the towers on September the 11th?
Actually, within the group of authors behind this paper, which we published in April, there are diverging opinions about what this nanothermite was used for. And in my opinion, we should not speculate in a scenario for the demolition. But there's no doubt that the 3 towers were demolished on 9/11. But beyond that, there is very solid evidence for that some thermite has been used for melting the steel beams. We do not know if the thermite that we have found is the same thermite which has been used for melting the beams. It's very, very possible that different varieties was used, and I personally am certain that conventional explosives were used too in abundance.
And when you say in abundance, how much do you mean?
Tons. 100 tons.
So
many tons.
We're not just talking about nanothermite, in fact, we're talking about both nanothermite and conventional explosives used in large quantities.
Yeah, but we have not found remains or traces of conventional explosives. Actually, we have suggested and recommended to NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, that they should look for remains or traces of explosives, and they have refused to do so every time. They have not investigated it.
And in terms of the nanothermite, the traces of which you did find, what are the possible explanations for its presence in the World Trade Center? I mean, could it have been in the aeroplanes? Could it have been a naturally occurring substance in any way?
Well, the 2 last questions or options I can definitely rule out. It cannot have come from the aeroplanes, and well, if it's been there on beforehand, those who put it there, I've urged them to step forward and tell us how and why it got there. One thing which has been mentioned frequently in the discussion following our publication is that this could be the primer paint which was applied to the steel beams in order to prevent corrosion. And many of the ingredients are the same in terms of iron oxide, as I told you, which is the red color where you see on steel beams usually when it's protected. It's the iron oxide. So some of the chemicals in there are the same. But the composition of the primer paint used, there are 2 very good reasons for this not being paint, in my opinion. One is that the composition, chemical composition of the paint, primer paint used in World Trade Center, according to NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, is vastly different from what we are seeing. To be specific, I say we are missing large amounts of chromium and zinc and magnesium. Next, which can be understood by everyone, is that the paint applied on the steel beams are stable to elevated temperatures. NIST did experiments with the steel beams because they wanted to use the appearance of the paint as a measure for the temperature the steel beams had been exposed to. And let me be specific. So when you heat up this steel beam at 250 degrees centigrade, it starts cracking. Now, this is because the steel expands more than the paint. So they get what they call mud cracks. And it keep on cracking until a temperature of about 650 degrees, where it starts peeling off, forming scales. This continues to about 800 degrees when this scaling becomes excessive. But it does not burn. So the paint on the steel beams is stable beyond 800 degrees centigrade. Now, the stuff we have found ignites at 430 degrees centigrade. So it is not the primer paint. So what I can say is this nanothermite? Well, it quacks like a duck, it waddles like a duck, it looks like a duck, maybe it's a duck. This is all we can say.
It's now around 3 months since your article was first published. What's the response been like? I understand that this is one of the first times that you've been interviewed for an English-speaking audience.
For the what you call the mainstream media, it has been dead silence except for 2 interviews I've done on Danish television, which has taken off on the internet to an extent that I had not anticipated. But on an official, organized level, it's a roaring silence, I must say.
Just going back a bit, what first piqued your interest in 9/11? How did you first come to examine the rubble, and what did you expect to find?
It goes back about 2.5 years, I think, when I accidentally saw Building 7. And to those who do not know this, we should make it absolutely straight that there were 2 airliners, but there were 3 skyscrapers. Most people associate World Trade Center with the Twin Towers. But World Trade Center was a center. There were 7 buildings. And the towers have number 1 and number 2. Now number 3, number 4, number 5 and number 6 were relatively small buildings from 9 to 22 stories. But Building 7 was a huge building, close to 200 meters high, 47 stories, with a footprint of the level of a small soccer field. And it came down 20 minutes after 5 in the afternoon. This was 7 hours after the North Tower collapsed. And I saw this accidentally, and I said, what is this? This is World Trade Center. What? And I had to see it again, because as most people, I didn't know about Building 7. And it is going down completely symmetrically in 6.5 seconds. It's going down with this zip. And as a scientist, you're trained to watch your environment in an analytical fashion. You always think, now how does this happen, how does this happen? And this I just couldn't understand, I cope with. Why should this building come down, which I've never heard about before in itself? I think this should raise some eyebrows, actually. Why haven't I heard about Building 7 before? And then it's coming down like this with no apparent reason. So I had to push the button again and again. And it took me weeks actually to digest this. And I think this is common to most persons, to realize what you have seen. But once you have realized this, there is no way back. So you can either speak out or you can live in shame. And from that on I got more and more interested. And I found out that the evidence for controlled demolition is overwhelming. The evidence for thermite is also, first, I told you that the thermite reaction produced molten iron. Now molten iron was pouring out of one of the towers. Molten iron was in pools of molten iron in the rubble after 9/11 for weeks and months. The surface temperature was 735 degrees after 3 days of heavy showers. It took them 3 months to put out the fire. It was declared officially extinguished on December the 20th. Now this is kind of fire. and the point is that the thermite kept on reacting. This was the bitch's brew of thermite chemistry for 3 months. Very sophisticated, very complicated. It's a masterpiece in demolition.
And who would be capable of producing such a masterpiece of demolition?
It is not compatible with the official conspiracy theory, the one with Osama bin Laden and the 19 hijackers. So I'm an anti-conspiracy theorist. I'm against the official conspiracy theory. But it's up for a criminal, we must have a criminal investigation to find out. This was a crime, and it has never been investigated as a crime.
You're the first team to have examined the rubble and the first team to have picked this up. Why do you think that is?
Technically, the collapses were investigated by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. So they should have looked into the dust. And they have been encouraged many times to look for remains of explosives, to look for remains of thermite. And actually there is some, when there is a fire in the United States which is suspicious or which is violent or which is unexpected, according to some regulation, you should look for thermite. It is in, because it is, you can use it for arson, and if you want to burn your house, this is the way to do it. You put in a thermic reaction and you go on vacation and you can trigger it with your cell phone on long distance if you wish. So this is routine for FBI to look for remains of thermite. This they do very frequently actually, but they didn't do it this time.
I mean, obviously you're a real scientist, if you like, so it's understandable that you don't want to be associated with conspiracy theorists and don't like that kind of term. What would you say to people who do lump you in that same category?
Then I must repeat, I mean, who are being fooled here? Because the official conspiracy theory, yeah, people call me strange things, and conspiracy theory theorists is not meant kindly. But who are being fooled here when we are being presented with an official conspiracy theory without any proofs, without a criminal investigation, with nobody being charged with this, and nobody is wanted? Osama bin Laden is not wanted by FBI for this. I mean, shouldn't there be some few questions to ask here? So I will turn the question back and say, who are the fools?